Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the leader of Iran's Al-Quds force of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, Major General Qassem Soleimani, spoke via live broadcasts to Gaza directly from Tehran, Iran. A few minutes into his presentation, technical difficulties emerged and the screen went blank. The transmission stopped. The message was cut off. The event was broadcast to the Commodore Hotel in Gaza, where Soleimani appeared on a huge screen. Originally, the commander was supposed to express appreciation for Gaza's leadership, and all senior Hamas leadership was scheduled to attend. Then the presentation was reconfigured for the mid-level leadership. Both the presenter and the attendees were fearful that with all the senior leadership in one room, they would be too rich and too tempting a target for Israel. They decided that the risk to their organization far outweighed the respect they would be paying to their patron Iran. To that end, Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar explained that security issues were at stake and he would not be attending the event. At the last minute, Mohammed al-Sar, a senior member of Hamas, also said, "I'm not coming." A number of things could have happened to cause a glitch in the transmission. But of course, Hamas blamed Israel for the transmission disruption. And they may be correct. Israel may have squelched the electronic telecast. They certainly have the wherewithal to do so, and they have an interest to do so also. But unless they change their current policy on targeting Hamas leaders only when they are actually in the act of planning an attack, Israel would not have used this magnet event to target Hamas leadership. Not as they sat together inside the hall of the Commodore Hotel, nor as they individually traveled to and from the event. Whatever Israel would or would not have done, however, is secondary to the story itself. The salient storyline, the essential point here, is the message that went forth out of the link between Hamas and Iran. With this broadcast, Iran and Hamas came out of the proverbial closet and publicly announced to the very close-knit and cozy relationship that they now have created. After going through a rough patch, Hamas and Iran are together again, linked arm in terrorist arm. The time for speculation is over. The facts speak for themselves. Hamas is receiving support and advice from Qassem Soleimani, the leader of the most active, aggressive, and best organized of all of Iran's elite units, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's Al-Quds force. Soleimani wields tremendous power. He is the mastermind responsible for Iran's success in Syria and Iraq. With the blessing of Iran's supreme leader, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is in charge of almost everything that is important to Iran, so much so that they either own or have significant interests in much of the country's infrastructure, including the oil industry, and even have substantial independent division charged with influencing and controlling the Guard's interests outside Iran. Qassem Soleimani is the maestro of the Guard. His followers nicknamed him Haj Qassem. Western intelligence services call him the shadow commander because he's always lurking in the shadows behind the scenes and always pulling the strings of operations and activities. Qassem Soleimani is a wanted man. He's wanted by countries around the world for his role as a terrorist organizer and a terrorist facilitator. For Hamas, he is an inspirational icon, and that is why he was invited to deliver a message to Hamas leadership, and that's why he accepted. His expertise is not building infrastructure. Soleimani does not establish schools or government institutions or justice systems. He is not a builder. He is a destroyer. He is a master murderer and terrorist organizer. For Hamas, the commander Qassem Soleimani is a role model and a hero. And by no coincidence, on the same day that Soleimani's speech was truncated in Gaza, Iran's supreme leader, the Grand Ayatollah Khamenei, gave a speech where he ranted on about the Palestinians and the commitment of the United States to Israel. The Iranian leader called on all of Islam to unite. He said, and I'm quoting here, "The Americans called it the deal of the century, but it will never be implemented. The Palestinian issue is not forgotten, and Jerusalem will always remain its capital. Palestinians, along with the support of the Muslim world, will continue the resistance." In Iranian speak, resistance is a synonym for terror or any attack against Israel. And the Iranians are in lockstep with Hamas. ISIS is acting and organizing both outside of the Middle East, where this most formidable of all terrorist organizations is attacking soft targets, and also in certain parts of the Middle East where they are acting aggressively and murderously. ISIS is coming on hard and strong. These Islamic extremist thugs are on the rise despite proud announcements proclaiming that ISIS has been destroyed. 4 highly coordinated suicide bomb attacks perpetrated by ISIS hit the southern town of Syria of Suwiya. The result was 250 people murdered, 180 wounded, and 36 more, 20 women and 16 children, kidnapped. This was one of the deadliest attacks in the long history of the Syrian civil war. All the victims were Druze. Druze, a split-off of Islam, is a secret religion that is seen by ISIS as heretics. Over the past few years, ISIS has repeatedly attacked Druze villages, massacring the men and forcing the women and children into slavery. 4 attacks took place as Syria basks in the glory of what they are calling a total victory over ISIS, and the rebels who, for the past 7.5 years, have been trying to oust Syrian President Bashar Assad. Apparently, that victory over ISIS is not as clear-cut as we have been led to believe. But even now, not too many people are paying attention to this rekindling and reconstitution of ISIS. And that only increases the danger and enhances the ability of ISIS to do their dastardly deeds. Vigilance is key. These are developments that we, the Western world, should not and cannot ignore. ISIS is not yet grabbing land. Right now, they are murdering, kidnapping, and using guerrilla tactics and instilling fear in southern Syria. What they are doing in Syria, they are also doing in Iraq. And just as Syria was taken by surprise by ISIS resurgence, Iraq is also being taken by surprise by ISIS resurgence. While ISIS is not yet controlling any complete region in Iraq, they are working towards that goal, and they are making headway. The ISIS comeback in Iraq has been slow and steady, and they have yet to take control of swaths of the country. For now, they collect in isolated areas and venture out to carry their attacks. Their operations of choice involve guerrilla tactics. ISIS knows that their tactics have not only been deadly, but also they instill fear in the hearts of those intended victims. The ISIS resurgence in Iraq comes only months after Iraqis, like the Syrians, declared the total victory over ISIS. Only a few short months ago, according to an official announcement made in Iraq, ISIS was totally defeated. When the Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi declared total victory over ISIS in early December 2017. It was front-page news, not only at home in the Middle East, but also in the mainstream Western media. At the time, Prime Minister Abadi said, "Our forces fully control the Iraqi-Syrian border, and thus we can announce the end of the war against Daesh, which is ISIS. Our battle was with the enemy that wanted to kill our civilization, but we have won with our unity and our determination." Vladimir Putin concurred with Abadi's assessment on December 11, 2017, in a similar announcement about Syria. The Russian president proclaimed, "The fact that we defeated ISIS, one of the main terrorist groups here in Syria, is extremely important for Syria, Russia, and the entire world." Wishful thinking? Perhaps. Premature celebration? Certainly. And ISIS has set their sights farther outside the Middle East. Their success in Syria and Iraq have not sated their appetite for conquest and destruction. ISIS is attacking U.S. and Western targets. The same week that ISIS attacked Syria and Iraq, ISIS also attacked Central Asia. In this case, 4 tourists, 2 Americans, a Swiss, and a Dutchman, were riding bicycles in Tajikistan when a car rammed into them. The victims were murdered after the car had plowed into them and turned around and ran over them again. The terror attack took place on a highway 60 miles southeast of the Tajiki capital, Dushanbe. The Clarion Project, an organization created to further educate about radical Islam, issued an ISIS terror map for 2018. According to the map, which does not even include these latest terror attacks in Syria, Iraq, and Tajikistan, ISIS is still very active. Many analysts and think tanks agree and are trying to suggest that it's too early to rest on the laurels when it comes to ISIS. The web is filled with ISIS recruitment ads and promises a rosy future for all takers. ISIS is not out of the game. The best tool in their arsenal is fear. The tactics they used most recently in Syria, massive coordinated bombings, group kidnappings, are the same tactics they used in 2003 in their very first operation in Iraq against the insurgents. It is those tactics that 15 years earlier changed our world and caused us to understand the letters ISIS and ISIL, for them to become significant parts of our lexicon. ISIS guerrilla operations need to be stopped. ISIS cannot be permitted to reconstitute itself, not in Iraq, not in Syria, not in Tajikistan, not anywhere. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. I wanted to discuss two columns from the New York Times. The Times op-ed pages have changed over the past 6 months. The Times has a good number of female op-ed writers. There are also a good number of women who are editorial writers too. These women have become a strong voice against racism and extremism. But that very voice has in itself stepped over the line and become problematic sometimes. This column is an example of exactly that. It calls half of the United States racist. This first column was written by Margaret Renkel, published online July 30th and in print July 31st. It's datelined Nashville. She is a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times itself. The piece is entitled, How to Talk to a Racist. White liberals, you're doing it all wrong. Renkel begins by explaining that what she thinks is the foundation of racist thought, that people just slip into this thought. This is how she writes. There are still white Southerners who honestly believe that American culture worked better for everyone, white and black alike, under segregation. There are still white Southerners who question how bad slavery really was. When an enslaved black person's health and strength are needed to guarantee the slaveholder's livelihood, this argument goes, it just wouldn't make sense to whip them or starve them or rape them or work them to the point of collapse. Renkel continues then to suggest that it's not just Southerners, but many Americans, especially white people, and of course anyone who watches Fox News. Listen to what she says. It's gripping and so disturbing. Southerners aren't alone in believing such mendacity, but the South is where slavery and segregation metastasized, so it may be more concentrated here. Wherever this insidious delusion takes hold, however, it requires a gargantuan ignorance of history to maintain. And there's a lot of ignorance afoot in the land right now. More people here in Tennessee today drive cars bearing license plates emblazoned with the Confederate battle flag than ever before. A strong majority of Southerners, 61%, are committed to keeping the Confederate monuments on public land. I've exhausted my ability to understand why. Deep into the 21st century, I'm still hearing otherwise good-hearted people use the same arguments that white Southerners used to discredit Uncle Tom's Cabin more than 150 years ago. It couldn't possibly have been that bad, but worse, in many ways, are the white people who will tell you point blank that the world today, the world they actually live in, can see with their own eyes, can't possibly be as unfair as black people say it is. Maybe this is what happens when a person's only news source is the alternative universe of Fox and Friends. Or maybe they're all just racist. Did you catch that? She calls them all racist. It's disturbing and racist of Renkel herself to even say this about the system. Her foundation is clear and sadly so mistaken. Listen to the rest. Okay, they're definitely all racist. But here's the thing. They don't believe they are. And the problem with writing off people who don't recognize this country's pervasive and enduring culture of white supremacy, much less the ways in which they themselves benefit from it, is simple. Being called a racist almost never causes a racist to wake up. Being called a racist almost never causes a racist to say, oh, wow, you're right. Hold on a minute. How is it possible that they are all racist? She gives you options if you are a white liberal, like most of the readers of the New York Times. Here is how she puts it. If you're a white liberal whose goal is to feel morally superior to such people, go right ahead and urge them to check their white privilege. Call them stupid rednecks. Get online and tweet your feats of moral daring-do in the cause of a more just society. You haven't made a single thing better for anyone suffering the actual effects of racism. But when has that ever stopped a white person from airing a little righteous indignation? If, on the other hand, you're a white liberal whose goal is to foster a more equitable culture, you need to stop yelling racist at anyone who doesn't see the world exactly as you do. Somehow you need to find enough common ground for a real conversation about race. Very few people are stupid or irredeemably mean. They'll listen to what you have to say if They trust you'll listen to what they have to say back. Now, Renko concludes with a real suggestion. Before you say a single word, think of all the times you made an assumption about a stranger that proved to be untrue. Think of the times you found yourself feeling uneasy in the company of strangers of another race. Think about how you were forced to interrogate that uneasiness. Think of a plank in your own eye to begin a real conversation about racism. Start there. Second up is also from the New York Times. The piece was published online August 4th and in print on August 5th. It's called The Jewish Crossroads. Can a mix of liberal politics and soft traditionalism survive a militant left and right-wing Israel? It's written by Ross Douthat. He is an opinion columnist for the New York Times. Douthat raises a series of questions about Jewish leaders and how they wield their power. That means how they've exploited women, especially weaker women in subordinate positions. He writes that while it's not unique in the Jewish community, he cites Stephen M. Cohen as an example. Cohen has been a regular on this network, actually. He is the preeminent thinker on Jewish demography and has been accused of having exploited numerous women. Does this warrant a New York Times column? Maybe. Douthat is not Jewish, but he is very concerned. He begins with the following. Every #MeToo scandal is different, but most are alike in at least one way, whether among Hollywood moguls, Southern Baptists, congressmen, or Catholic bishops. The fall of the prominent men usually accelerates some pre-existing debate about where the larger institution or culture should be going, and which side of its internal arguments deserve to gain. Lately, the American Jewish community has presented an interesting case study with a series of accusations against Stephen M. Cohen, a sociologist who has spent much of his career studying the demography of American Jewish life and linking trends to Jewish intermarriage and fertility to his people's cultural continuity. Some of the authors and other attacks against Cohen is an attack against the Jewish community and its values, family, reproduction, intermarriage, marriage in general. The argument is that these are closed values and not open values. Leaving that aside, Douthat continues. These centrifugal forces pulling leftward and rightward have already alienated young liberal Jews in the United States from the uncomplicated pro-Israel sentiments of their grandparents, and they may portend a future where the liberal politics with a dose of cultural conservatism combination gives way to a sharper choice for many Jews, a more consistently conservative Judaism bound to Israeli nationalism, and a more liberal Judaism that's more consistently liberal and less identitarian, and perhaps ultimately more secularized and assimilated. As for whether this divergence will ultimately be, as they say, good for the Jews, well, that's a question this Gentile columnist leaves to the chosen people to debate. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I want to discuss two cartoons today. The first is by Rick McKee and was published in the Augusta Chronicle on August 4th, 2018. The Ayatollah in Iran is sitting and reading a newspaper, which reads, North Korea is still building nukes. He's holding a phone message that reads, Trump wants to talk. And he himself asks, maybe I can get the same deal Kim Jong-un got. Second up is a cartoon by the artist Schott and was published August 6, 2018. The Ayatollah is sitting and having tea with Trump. It is an Iranian-American summit. The Ayatollah says to Trump, Great Satan, do you like sugar with your tea? Trump then asks the Ayatollah, Thank you, demented terrorist leader. Care for a cookie? These are funny jokes poking at the situation and the tension between the United States and Iran. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Iran conducted military drills in the Straits of Hormuz. The United States military was aware of the plan and watched the Iranian drills very intently. That suits Iran just fine. They want the U.S. to pay attention. Iran is making a clear statement by way of their Revolutionary Guard and the 100 boats and thousands of troops taking part in the drills in the Straits of Hormuz. They're in charge. One of the most effective weapons the Iranian Revolutionary Guards employs is their swift rubber boats. The boats are very small, very fast, and extremely maneuverable. They are so low to the water that the boats are very difficult to detect on radar. No surprise, the Iranians are very effective at attacking large ships. The Straits of Hormuz is a waterway through which 20% of the world's oil travels every single day. Iran knows that if they sink as few as 2 tankers, they will successfully stall the delivery of oil and cripple worldwide distribution and shoot the cost of oil up through the ceiling. The Iranians also know that they can, and have in the past, attacked U.S. ships in the Straits of Hormuz. Iran knows that they have an advantage, and that advantage includes mini submarines made specifically to hit and run in the Straits of Hormuz. Israel is under cyber attack. There has been an uptick in cyber attacks against Israel, attacks that are different from previous attacks against Israel. Series of attacks. These are serious attacks emanating from Iran, China, and Russia. They're much more serious than we've seen in the past. These are hacking attacks. The attackers are not simply interested in trying to crash sites and breach security. That is what the huge amateur hacking community normally sets their goals on. This is much, much more sophisticated and more dangerous. These hackers from Iran, China, and Russia are trying to secretly access and monitor the acts and behavior of Israeli military. They want the military's secrets and decision-making protocols. The hackers, especially those from China and Russia, are particularly sophisticated and very talented. Israel has its hands full. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. The tenets of the Druze religion are secret. It is a secret religion. The Druze consider their faith to be a new interpretation of the 3 monotheistic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It's mostly based on Islam. Their heroes are from all 3 traditions. For the Druze, let's say, for instance, the traditional story of creation is a parable which describes Adam, not as the first human being, but as the first person to believe in one God, the first monotheist. Since then, the idea of monotheism for Druze has been disseminated by emissaries or prophets, guided by mentors who embody the spirit of monotheism. The mentors of the prophets come from all 3 religions. They include Jethro and Moses, John the Baptist and Jesus. Of course, they include Salman the Persian and Muhammad, the founder of Islam. All are reincarnations, and all have the same monotheistic idea. In addition, Druze hold other influential people, regardless of their religion, in great esteem, as advocates of justice and belief in one God. These include Greek philosophers, let's say, like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and Alexander the Great. Now, although the Druze recognize all 3 monotheistic religions, they believe that rituals and ceremonies have caused Jews, Christians, and Muslims to turn aside from pure faith. They argue that individuals who believe that God will forgive them if they fast and pray will commit transgressions in expectation of being forgiven, and then repeat their sins afterwards. The Druze eliminated all elements of ritual and ceremony. There is no fixed daily liturgy, no defined holy days, and no pilgrimages. The Druze perform a spiritual reckoning with God at all times, and consequently need no special days of fasting or atonement. The Druze religion is secret and closed to converts. Even to the 90% of the Druze themselves don't know about it. From the theological perspective, the secrecy derives from a tenet that the gates of the religion were open to new believers for the space of the generation when it was first revealed. And because everyone was invited to join, since today everyone alive is a reincarnation of someone who was alive at the time, there's no reason to allow them to join today because they're already a part of it. Therefore, the Jews refrain from missionizing, and no member of another religion can become a Druze. Druze religious books are accessible only to the initiates, those who know, and those who are ignorant, the Juhal, accept the faith on the basis of tradition handed down from generation to generation. The Druze religion has no ceremonies, rituals, no obligation to perform precepts in public. The main tenets that obligate all Druze, both knowledgeable ones and non-knowledgeable ones, are speaking truth, they do that instead of prayer, supporting your brethren instead of charity, abandoning old creeds instead of fasting, purification from heresy instead of pilgrimage, accepting the unity of God, and submitting to the will of God instead of holy war. All the believers of Druze tradition have different appearances. The men have shaven heads and covered with white turban with a big mustache and beard. The women wear a white headscarf called the nakab. The most pious among the women hide their hair underneath their hair covering and fasten it underneath the white scarf. The Druze are forbidden to eat pork, smoke, or drink alcohol. You, the viewer, now know more than most Druze about Druze tradition. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.